Hi, welcome back to the Shtick. We're in the studio just trying to evaluate what's going on in the world at the moment, which is what we call in Hebrew a balagan. It's a big mess. And to try and sort it out and clean up what's going on, we've got Joel Burnie here.
Thank you very much for having me, Henry. It's a pleasure to be back.
It's really great to have you back because you've been on the news lately, and it's not good news for anybody in the world, because there's a lot of conflict, and we'll just talk about that. But I just wanted to introduce you as the executive manager at AIJAC, Australian Israel Jewish Affairs Council. That's it. It's a big mouthful, and you've got a massive job. Your publication is this. It's the Australian Israel Review, which I picked up a copy of. I was at an event the other day where I met your special guest, Elliot Abrams. Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit about Elliot.
So Elliot served for 3 presidents. He was the former Deputy National Security Advisor to George W. Bush and also the Assistant Secretary of State for Ronald Reagan. Elliot is one of the preeminent foreign policy minds in all of the United States, but specifically his expertise are both in Latin America but also the Middle East as well. So obviously we had booked Elliot's trip before October the 7th, but to Elliot's credit, he still decided to come out, and his visit couldn't be more timely.
Exactly, and you had another guest who was supposed to come. We were just discussing General Ayalon.
That's right. We had General Moshe Boogie Ayalon, Lieutenant General, former Chief of Staff of the IDF, and also Defence Minister was supposed to come, but obviously due to the circumstances on October the 7th, he was unable to attend.
And he's picking tomatoes in Gaza.
He currently is now. He's helping out any way that he can by those fields still need to be picked, so people in Israel still need food, and obviously with the devastation that's gone on since the massacre of October the 7th on the borders of Gaza in the south of Israel, they're lacking a few hands for work. So the General and many others have gone down to volunteer their time to help out the country.
Wonderful. Well, it was a very big surprise, the massacre, the attack from the Hamas into the south of Israel, and it was, you wrote an article on October the 10th in The Age, which described your horror. Can you just give us a little bit more of the way you felt then?
I've been working as a Jewish professional for a long time, Henry, as you know, which puts me at the coalface of a lot of things, but most specifically domestic anti-Semitism, so facts and figures and events over the past couple of decades as to what Australian Jews have felt and certain issues in regards to how we live as Jews in Australia, but also at the coalface of the demonisation, delegitimization and double standards that apply to Israel. So I personally, for one, was aware of what Hamas was capable of, and I, like many Israelis, knew that they had said that they would want to do these things.
Well, their charter of 1987 designates their main aim to eliminate Israel.
So the attack itself was definitely a surprise, but the intention of Hamas, the terror organization, to do what it actually did and to carry out what it did does not surprise me, given the fact that they were provided with that opportunity. The scenes that we witnessed on October the 7th and subsequent will go down as one of the worst terror attacks in history, not just in the Israeli context, but in the global context. The amount of dead civilians, innocent children, women, elderly, and men that were slaughtered, house to house, slaughtered where they sat. Not only is it a war crime, but the sheer total of death from that day, as we all are aware, was our largest Jewish death toll since the Holocaust.
Around 1,400 people.
So it's important for your viewers to know one very important thing. Yes, it is currently at about 1,400 to 1,500 people, but there are still 400 people yet to be identified, and they are not included in the overall death count.
Wow.
So that death count is going to get close to 2,000. The problem is, Henry, is because of the savagery of the way that these people were killed. Young children aged 10 months with their hands bound behind their backs with metal wire and burnt to death. Families of 4 and 5 that held each other tightly as they were burnt alive. For the forensic teams, it's very, very difficult, given those circumstances as to how those people died, to be able to identify all of them before burial.
And also there was the massacre at the dance festival, which was a festival for peace, and they somehow or other, there was a major intelligence failure. I feel, I mean, it's pretty obvious that, you know, how can you have 1,000 people dancing around and these people can just come and just pot shot them?
Look, all I can say to that is that Israel is a robust democracy, as you know, Henry. So there will be a time when there will be a very thorough commission of inquiry, an independent commission of inquiry that will take as long as it takes to find out exactly what went wrong on October 7th.
Because we can't let it happen again.
I have no doubt, and there will be that commission of inquiry, but that will happen at the end of the war. At the moment, and as we all know, Israel was, over the past 12 months, a very fractured society.
There was months and months of demonstrations.
Correct. There was a significant amount of upheaval and upset in the community, and battle lines were drawn. However, due to the events of October 7th, you will not find a more unified country in Israel than what you find now. They are unified behind the leadership team, behind the unity government that Benjamin Netanyahu has been able to form, and they will stay behind that government until the war is over. But once it is over, as I said, as it is a robust democracy, there will be a thorough investigation and a thorough commission of inquiry that will come up with its results. I don't want to predetermine what those results are going to be because I think it's too early. But that soul searching will happen at another day.
And it seems the underlying reason they did it, besides their savagery and just wanting to take their brutality out on the locals, because they're literally, you know, very close neighbours to the border, was to grab hostages.
Well, I think that was obviously their intent. So they wanted to kill as many people as they could and take as many hostages as they could, and they were very successful in doing so. Look, the timing of the event is also interesting. It appears as though, from the intelligence that we already have, that this was a planned operation for the past 12 months. However, the perceived weaknesses in Israeli society are one thing to look at, but also the timing of this to coincide with the 50th anniversary of the Yom Kippur War, which was on the 6th of October, the day before the attack, but also the main aim of the main puppeteers of Hamas, which is the mullahs in Iran. What did they want out of this strike? They wanted to derail any potential normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia, and at least for the time being, they've proven successful in doing so.
Hi, welcome back to the Shtick. We're in the studio with Joel Burnie. There are so many factors involved in this whole, what I called at the beginning, the balagan, because that's my favourite Hebrew word, because, you know, it means a mess, and it really is, because we've got Iran, and then we haven't mentioned Hezbollah, who've got missiles, like thousands of missiles strained, and the visit and the support of President Biden to, and then we had the Prime Minister of Britain, and then we had the French Prime Minister. There's been a lot of support, and our own Prime Minister has also put his support behind it, but unfortunately the left of the Labor Party have been not so forthcoming.
Look, so taking that bit by bit, there's no doubt that President Biden's support and leadership in this has been very, very important. Not just important for the Israeli people, but also practically. So
strategically.
That's right. So moving the carrier group in the first days of the conflict was very, very good, because you raised Hezbollah. So Hezbollah has a larger arsenal of rockets and missiles than what Hamas does, and they also have a significant amount of what we call precision-guided missiles. So the devastation that could be unleashed by Hezbollah is actually far greater than what could be done by Hamas in terms of the rockets and the missiles. So having that carrier group in the Mediterranean, followed by a second carrier group that came into the second week since the October 7 attack, is interpreted by many analysts as a warning to Hezbollah. in Lebanon to not open a northern front, and if they do, then the Americans will hopefully provide the support that's required that Israel can fight a two-front war at the same time, because that would be very, very difficult for Israel to do. Even though that they would do it, it would still be very, very difficult for them to do. So having that leadership from President Biden, followed by many other leaders, specifically European leaders, as you alluded to, and also our Prime Minister, has been very important. But what I will say, Henry, I think it's a recognition by the Western world as to how abhorrent and how gruesome and disgusting this terror attack actually was. Israel is a Western democracy. It is a symbol of the West in a neighborhood where there are not many other democracies, if any. So I think that those leaders that showed solidarity with Israel, it's an extension of the potential concerns that they have within their own countries, and as a sign of solidarity to us, with the hope that we will show solidarity to them as well.
There is also the situation of the rallies. Now, we've had some Jewish rallies which I've shown over the last 2 weeks on the Shtick, because it was just too difficult to get anybody in. I've been waiting for this moment to get you in and get a personal opinion from somebody as yourself who is so involved in the community. But there's also the concern of all the rallies all over the world, which are just humongous. I don't know where they got all those Palestinian flags from, but they're just like massive rallies all over the world. And then the situation in Sydney at the Opera House was the most disturbing. That went around the world in 5 minutes, you know, where it was just disgusting how they were not acknowledging the brutality and the massacring of Jews in Israel. But the worst part is in the United States, where the squad is now coming out so strong and calling for a ceasefire, and they're anti-American, anti-Israel. And it's just such a problem for us to have all these people who are changing the narrative to make anyone who's evil join the throngs.
Yeah, I think every Australian has to be upset and angry at what we all witnessed on the steps of the Opera House. Every Australian, not just Jewish Australians or Muslim Australians or pro-Palestinian Australians, all Australians should feel very strongly and be very angry and upset with the scenes that they witnessed. The idea that 48 to 72 hours after one of our most fatal days since the end of the Holocaust, we're going to have celebrations on the streets of Western Sydney. Celebrations, Henry.
Less than 40.
And then
less than 48
And then
hours.
to have gas the Jews, gas the Jews, F the Jews, F the Jews, whilst New South Wales police stood idly by and watched it, burning Israeli flags. And then that spawns off into now what we call these peaceful marches and these peaceful protests, where they're not saying gas the Jew and F the Jew, Henry, but what they are saying is down Israel, and from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, which is very clear in what its message is. It is calling for the eradication of Israel. I cannot understand as to why you would want to go to the streets of Melbourne and Sydney after the scenes that were beamed live on Facebook. It is not as though the brutality of what Hamas did on that day cannot be seen by these people. Whilst they know what happened, there's no call of these rallies for the release of hostages, no calls on these rallies of an outstretched arm to their Jewish cousins who are in time of need. But you know what, our community, Henry, our community now, after we get massacred and our family and friends get massacred in Israel, we're now less safe living in Australia. Living in Melbourne, Australia, you and I are less safe. My daughter that goes to a creche, she's now less safe than what she was 2 weeks ago. My other daughter that attends a Jewish school is now less safe than what she was 2 weeks ago. That's something that doesn't obviously impact and affect us. It should have a profound impact on the Australian community as well.
The final thing I want to talk to you about is the PR war, the fake news. Now, in terms of the acknowledging what happened, the word got around that amongst the pro-Palestinians that it was all fake. They didn't believe any of it, right? Can you imagine how, because that's what we're fighting. We're fighting these people who are just not acknowledging in any way or shape. All they're saying is that Israel is genocidal, colonialist, all the things that they're apartheid, all the word colonialist. Every word that they use is completely wrong. Now, the blood libel that occurred last week with the hospital bombing, now that went around the world. What do you think about that?
There's a couple of things. Firstly, obviously, the initial reporting did two problematic things. Firstly, it falsely attributed blame for the strike on Israel, and it also perpetuated a very clear propaganda line from Hamas about the amount of people that had died. Yeah. So you had two things. You had that Israel did it, and that up to 300 to 500 people have died. Now, that was Wednesday last week, so we're now talking less than a week later. Luckily, as a silver lining, we are not seeing that Israel did it anymore. In actual fact, most independent news outlets, including AP and the Wall Street Journal, have just done a significant investigation that proves that it was an errant PIJ, Palestinian Islamic Jihad missile that hit the hospital. Okay?
Yep.
The second thing that we're not seeing, at least in the Australian press, is again this perpetuation of the lie of this huge death toll of 300 to 500, which there is no way that they would have been able to ascertain so shortly after the strike and the reporting of. So it was clear it was propaganda. It was clear that it was a lie.
Yep.
I'm not excusing the original sin of the bad reporting. All I'm saying to you is that luckily, in my assessment through mainstream media, that lie hasn't held on. That lie hasn't become a Jenin, for instance, of the Second Intifada, or another false claim that that gets held on to and consistently referred back to. So there is one silver lining to it. All I will say to conclude on the point is this. Whenever you see numbers coming out of Gaza, of fatalities, those numbers are coming from what's called the Palestinian Health Ministry. That ministry is run by Hamas. So on the same time...
They can say whatever they want.
Right, so we have this group that can inflict one of the most devastating and gruesome and bloody terror attacks in history, whilst at the same time our media outlets are taking their facts and figures and their numbers and publishing them in their articles to give some type of skewed scale as to the amount of Palestinians that are being killed versus the amount of Jews that are being killed. Now, they're unreliable because they're coming from Hamas, but they're also unreliable because they're devoid of context. It doesn't say how many of those that were killed were terrorists. No. 80% of them could be, right? They don't say that, right? So when we have to be, the media has a responsibility and they're aware of it. I don't think that they're overly happy now because they have egg on their face, those that did report it in the early stages, because they know now that it was patently false. So hopefully, my hope that until this conflict is over, that last week's hospital propaganda issue will become a learning experience for the journos and they won't repeat it, right? They will be more careful in how and what they adopt from those outlets, and they will be careful and more, they will scrutinize the information they get, certainly from Hamas-run ministries.
Well, we're going to have to end it there. And I'd like to thank you so much, Joel, for coming into the studio today. And we'd love to have you back again. I hope this ends soon. And what we really need to say is that Israel is an ethical army and they try everything they can to keep innocent civilians out of harm's way, despite anything that's been said. And that unfortunately Hamas work on the other side of the scale where they're just evil and all they want to do is create havoc and horrible situations. But anyway, we'll be going off into the next segment. We have a young man here from Israel he's an envoy actually, he's been sent to Australia. His name is Niv Gronovich, and he will be in the studio next. He's a young medical student who's come out to talk about his experience and to spread Israel's goodwill.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for having me, Henry. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Joel. And we'll be back after the break with Nia Gronovich.